All right, diving in today. We're tackling, it's a tough one, gaslighting. But not the kind you might be thinking of.
Right, not romantic relationships this time.
We're looking at adult children gaslighting their parents.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, and we've got this article from Psychology Today UK. It's from November 30th of this year, 2024. They outline some signs this might be happening, and honestly, it's kind of eye-opening. You know, we think about gaslighting and like relationships and stuff, but families, it's different. There's already so much.
Oh, absolutely. Layers of trust, history.
Exactly. Love, obligation. It can be really hard to even recognize it's happening.
The article hits on that for sure. They break down 4 major signs.
Okay, so let's get into it. Sign number 1, rewriting history.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Basically, it's when events get, twisted. Denying things happen the way the parent remembers, changing details to make the parent look bad.
It's like, whoa, hold on. That's not how I remember it, ATL.
Exactly, and it can really mess with the parent's sense of self. Like their own sanity is questioned. They start doubting everything.
That's got to be so disorienting. And to have it come from your child, the article gave this example, Martha and Julio. Martha remembers being supportive through Julio's childhood, but he claims she was totally neglectful.
Talk about isolating. To have your own memories dismissed like that.
It's like you can't even address the problem because you're second-guessing your side of the story constantly.
You're always on the defensive.
Yeah.
The article suggested a couple of things that I thought were interesting. Journaling.
Oh, smart.
Yeah, not just for processing emotions, but as a record, like proof.
Right, because then it's not just he said, she said. You've got something to ground yourself in.
Exactly. And then clear communication. Saying things like, look, I understand you remember it differently, but this is how I recall it.
So you're acknowledging their perspective without getting into this big
defensive battle.
Okay, that's helpful. Journaling and clear communication. All right, sign number 2. This one, the name itself is intense. Weaponizing guilt.
Oh boy, yeah. This could be a big one in families. It's when genuine parental concern, like the natural instinct to help your kid, gets twisted.
Used against them.
Exactly. They might blame their struggles on the parent's past actions, to manipulate them into giving money, emotional support, whatever it is.
It's preying on that instinct to nurture. The article's example, Karen and Lily. Lily kept demanding money from Karen, blaming it all on Karen being strict when she was younger. There's this quote, Lily says, a good mom would make up for the mistakes she made.
Oh, that's rough.
Isn't it? It makes you wonder, how do parents separate that genuine reflection, like maybe I did mess up sometimes, from this manipulation tactic?
It's so hard. The article suggested setting boundaries, but with empathy. Like saying, I hear you, you're hurting, I want to support you, but in a way that helps you be independent.
So you're acknowledging their feelings, but not letting them dictate your actions. Tricky balance.
For sure. All right, on to sign number 3, minimizing feelings. I think we've all been there.
Oh yeah, that feeling when you express something important and it's just brushed off. You share your hurt, your frustration, and they're like, you're overreacting. Or it's not a big deal.
It's incredibly invalidating, especially over time. It erodes your confidence. Like, can I even express myself honestly?
They're essentially silencing you. The example from the article, Rocco and Elisa. Rocco tries to share his sadness about their strained relationship. Elisa rolls her eyes. You're always so sensitive.
Classic.
And the worst part, Rocco just shuts down.
That's the danger. It leads to these communication breakdowns. Yeah. The parent ends up feeling totally unheard.
So how do you break that cycle? How do you even speak up when you're constantly being told your feelings are wrong?
The article recommended assertive communication. Clearly stating, my emotions matter. I'd appreciate it if you respected how I feel.
It's about taking ownership. Okay, so we've got rewriting history, weaponizing guilt, minimizing feelings. That brings us to the final sign the article highlights, questioning your decisions. This one feels particularly sneaky, especially with the parent-child dynamic.
It really is. It plays on the parent wanting to be seen as competent, caring, supportive. Mm-hmm. But the adult child might use that to make the parent doubt themselves, especially when it comes to setting boundaries.
Like you're trying to protect yourself and they turn around to make you the bad guy.
Exactly. The example, Maria and Ethan. Ethan wants Maria to co-sign a loan. She says no. And suddenly she's the unreasonable one for not supporting him.
It's like they twist your good intentions against you.
And it taps into that societal pressure. Parents should always support their kids no matter what. But sometimes setting a boundary is the supportive thing. It's about recognizing you have the right to protect your own well-being.
Even if your kid doesn't like it.
Right. And the article really emphasized standing firm in those decisions. They even had this phrase you could use: I've thought this through and I'm confident in my choice.
I like that. It's direct, but it doesn't invite
An argument.
Okay, so much to think about already. But before we move on, something's been bugging me. The article is all about adult children gaslighting parents. But couldn't it go the other way?
Oh, 100%.
Like the parent being the gaslighter?
It can happen in any relationship where there's a power imbalance. And let's be real, traditionally, parents hold a lot of that power.
So it's not this simple evil child victim parent situation.
Nope, way more nuanced. The parent might minimize the adult child's feelings, question their judgment, even rewrite history to stay in control, especially if there were, similar patterns when the child was younger.
So it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly, which is why self-awareness is huge EE. It's just as important to recognize those unhealthy patterns in ourselves as it is in others.
And that can be tough. Like, who wants to admit they might be contributing to the problem?
It takes courage, for sure. But that's how real change happens.
And sometimes it takes getting outside help, right? Therapists, coaches, support groups. The article talked a lot about those resources.
It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help.
Yeah.
I'd say a big red flag is when it's causing major distress.
Yeah.
If you're constantly anxious, depressed, second-guessing yourself.
Your mental health is on the line.
Right. Or if communication has gotten so toxic you can't even have a productive conversation. It's all arguments, accusations, shutdowns.
Like trying to talk during a hurricane, you can't even hear yourself think.
Perfect analogy. A therapist can be that calm in the storm. They can help facilitate communication, create a safe space to process feelings.
So both parties can learn to interact in a healthier way.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've talked a lot about the impact on the parent. What about the adult child who IS gaslighting? Like, what are the consequences for them if this keeps happening?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I think it gets overlooked a lot.
Right, like in the short term, maybe they get their way, they avoid conflict.
Yeah.
But long term, there's a cost.
Big time.
Trust gets eroded, relationships get damaged, isolation creeps in.
It's like winning the battle but losing the war.
People catch on to manipulation eventually. It's not sustainable. So these adult children might end up with fewer genuine connections, struggles in their personal life, their work life, because that pattern just keeps repeating.
So it's not just about hurting others, it's about hurting themselves in the process.
Often it's coming from somewhere deeper, insecurity, fear of being vulnerable, maybe even past trauma. Therapy can help address that, teach healthier ways of relating to others.
That makes sense. But it brings up another question for me: accountability. The article talks about getting support, but what about holding people accountable for this kind of behavior?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it has to happen on multiple levels: individual, societal. It's a big one.
Yeah, like where do we even start with holding people accountable for something as, I don't know, slippery as emotional manipulation?
Well, I think on a personal level, it starts with boundaries. You have to be willing to say, nope, I'm not playing this game. And sometimes that means distance, like actually stepping back from the relationship to protect yourself.
It's that tough love thing. Sometimes walking away is the kindest thing you can do for yourself, even if it hurts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you mentioned societal accountability too, and that's huge GE. It starts with taking emotional abuse as seriously as we take physical abuse.
Which honestly, we don't always do. We kind of brush it off like it's just drama or a personality clash.
Exactly. But it can be just as damaging, if not more so. We need education, awareness campaigns, resources for victims. We've made progress with other forms of abuse. Emotional abuse needs that same attention.
You're right. It's like we have this blind spot for it. But that brings up something I've been thinking about a lot: self-accountability. We've talked about recognizing it in others, but what about in ourselves?
Oh, that's so important. We all have blind spots, right? We can fall into those unhealthy patterns, especially when we're stressed or feeling threatened. So being willing to look inward and say, hey, maybe I'm contributing to this, that's huge EE.
It's like we can't expect others to change if we're not willing to do the same.
Exactly. And sometimes that takes having people in our lives who can give us honest feedback, those friends, family members who can say, maybe you didn't handle that the best way. It's not about blame. It's about using that feedback to grow.
It's about being humble and wanting to be better communicators to build healthier relationships. Man, this has been such a deep dive. It feels like we've barely scratched the surface, but it's been so eye-opening.
I agree. It's a complex topic. There are no easy answers. But I think the biggest takeaway is gaslighting. In any relationship, it's serious. It can cause real damage. But the good news is it's not insurmountable.
We can overcome it.
By shining a light on these behaviors, talking about them, holding ourselves and each other accountable, we can create a culture where it's just not tolerated.
Where healthy communication is the norm. And remember, if you're experiencing this, you're not alone. There's help out there. Healing is possible.
So well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on and keep exploring the fascinating world of human behavior.
Multiple levels, yeah.
So on a personal level, what can someone do if they're facing this? How do they hold the person accountable?
I think it starts with those boundaries we were talking about. You have to be willing to say, no, I'm not engaging in this. And sometimes that means distance. It can mean stepping back from the relationship to protect yourself.
That's got to be hard. Like, especially when it's your kid.
Oh, it's incredibly tough.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's the healthiest choice, even if it hurts. But you're right, there's a bigger piece too. Societal accountability.
What does that even look like for emotional abuse?
It starts with taking it seriously. Like as seriously as we take physical abuse, which, let's be honest, we haven't always done a great job with this.
They kind of downplay it.
We do. It's like, oh, it's just a family squabble, or they'll work it out. But it can leave lasting scars.
Deeper than we realize sometimes.
We need education, awareness campaigns, resources for victims. Like, think about the progress we've made with other forms of abuse. Domestic violence, sexual assault. Emotional abuse needs that same attention.
And that shift, it's already happening, right?
Yeah.
Slowly but surely. But as we wrap up here, something that keeps coming back to me is self-accountability. We've talked about recognizing gaslighting in others, but what about in ourselves?
Oh, that's huge GE. Because let's be real, we all have blind spots.
We do.
We can fall into those unhealthy communication patterns, especially when we're stressed or feeling threatened. So being willing to look at ourselves honestly and say, hey, maybe I messed up there, that's the game changer.
It's like you can't ask others to change if you're not willing to do the same.
100%. And, sometimes that takes having people in our lives who can call us out in a loving way, of course.
Right. Those trusted friends or family members who can say, maybe you didn't handle that the best way. Not to blame you, but to help you grow.
Exactly. It's about being humble, open to feedback. Because ultimately, we all want to be better communicators, build healthier relationships.
Well said. Man, this has been quite the deep dive. It feels like we've only just dipped our toes in the water, but it's been eye-opening.
It really has. It's such a complex issue. And the truth is, there are no easy answers.
No magic solutions.
But I think the biggest takeaway for our listeners is this. Gaslighting in any relationship, it's serious. It can cause real damage.
Yeah.
But it's not a life sentence.
It can be overcome.
By shining a light on these behaviors, talking about them, holding ourselves and each other accountable, we can shift the culture. We can make gaslighting unacceptable.
And create a world where healthy communication is the norm. That's the goal, right?
Absolutely. And, if you're out there listening and you're dealing with this, please know you're not alone. There's help available, healing IS possible.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on and keep exploring this fascinating world of human behavior.